So this question of how much you need to have saved up in order to retire successfully is a really loaded one. Of course, we understand that the purpose of saving for retirement is you got to build up this big nest egg so that you can safely withdraw from it in retirement and supplement your income. And the trick is to save up enough so that you could safely withdraw from that nest egg to fill the gap in your income without risking drawing it all down before you pass away, which is easier said than done a lot of times. And I know some people have the idea that they're not going to retire, and they say things like, I'm not going to be able to save up enough, and that doesn't really matter because I'm just going to keep working into my 70s. And while there's nothing necessarily wrong with continuing to work well past traditional retirement age, it's really naive to assume that you're going to be able to extend your career that far. Sometimes people have this attitude that, well, it doesn't really matter, I'm just going to keep working, but you got to consider that sickness, layoffs, disability, changing job dynamics, schedule demands, and just even your personal desires, that can all change pretty rapidly. So if your retirement plan is, I'm just going to keep working until I die, well then could I respectfully say, that's not a plan. That's just choosing to bury your head in the sand and hope for the best. You need to have some kind of savings. You need to be taking some kind of effort to prepare for that income gap down the road. But how much you need is going to depend on a lot of factors. There are other sources of income that you've got to take into account. You have to think about what your desired standard of living is going to be, housing costs, area of the country that you're going to live in, estate planning considerations, charitable giving plans, etc., etc. So here's how most people in America retire. When they finally decide to quit working, either because they're just done or circumstances have necessitated it, then they start drawing on the retirement income, which for most people includes their Social Security. Now, depending on what age they retire, maybe they don't draw Social Security right away. You can take Social Security as early as 72 or as late as 70. So if you retire early, maybe you wait a little bit. But Social Security, and then they begin to draw on their retirement savings to cover the gap. Now, maybe they have a pension from the military or the government or a former employer that's also going to help supplement their income. But let's face it, pensions are becoming less and less common. I mean, even the military now offers the option of either going the traditional pension route or a thrift savings plan, the TSP, which is like the equivalent of a 401k. So this means that the average retiree in America has 2, maybe 3 sources of income in retirement. So let me just take a quick time out to say, I would highly recommend you to build multiple streams of income, not just 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, as many as you can build up over your lifetime. Because that's only going to serve to strengthen the success rate and how well you're able to retire. So your retirement accounts are one stream of income. Your 401k, your IRAs, these types of things. Social Security, that's another source of income. Pension could be a third. Now, what are other streams of income that you could build up? Could be a rental property or multiple rental properties. Could be a business or businesses that you own. Could be royalties from creative work that you've done, like write a book or write a song. Could be maybe a website, e-commerce site that runs itself for the most part. Or it could even be a side hustle that's pretty minimal, like doing some consulting once a month, selling a course that you've developed, etc. Lots of different things can fit in that box. But really what we're looking for here is things that are going to consistently deposit in your bank on a monthly or quarterly or yearly basis with little or no maintenance needed on your part. So that's why a full-time job is not a stream of income, because with a full-time job, you are renting your time for pay, and that's not sustainable, and that's not retirement. So sometimes people ask the question, well, is $1 million enough to retire on? I've been asked that question multiple times. And it's a tough question because it really depends. For some people, that would be plenty of money. If they had $1 million, they could retire tomorrow, no problem. But for other people, it's not even close to what they would need. So in almost every case, what people are looking to do is maintain the same standard of living in retirement. Whatever their monthly spending is on the last day of work, is usually what they're going to spend in retirement because that's the lifestyle that they're accustomed to and it's hard to move away from that. Now, sometimes people will say that they're going to spend less and they fully expect that their standard of living is going to decrease in retirement. But honestly, human emotion, human habit, they usually trump those good intentions. So when planning for retirement and planning for your retirement income, it's good to plan to have at least the same level of income that you have now. Now, some of that's going to be filled by Social Security. Maybe not immediately, depending on when you retire, but a good portion, a good chunk, most likely, is going to be covered by Social Security. Then maybe you add in a pension, maybe a rental property income, royalties, etc., different streams of income. You add all those up, and then if there's a gap between what you were accustomed to spending per month and what's actually coming in from these other streams of income, then you're going to have to pull from your investment portfolio, from your retirement savings, to fill that income gap so that you can maintain the same standard of living that you had when you were working your primary job. So to use a very simple example, let's say we have a couple that earns $7,500 a month net, and they both retire at age 67, and they take Social Security at that time, their full Social Security, they don't wait till 70, and let's say that payment combined is $5,000 a month. And let's say they have no other sources of income, so they will need $2,500 a month net, that's after taxes, from their portfolio to fill that income gap so they can have $7,500 a month to spend. Now, how much that gap's going to be is really going to vary wildly by person and by family. So here's what we want to do in this episode. Let me share with you some research, some numbers on where most Americans actually are in their retirement savings, how much progress they've made. And then I'm going to share with you where some experts recommend you should be by age. And then we'll do a little bit of compare, contrast, and talk about what you can do to prepare for retirement. So let's start by looking where the average American is by age. This is a report from the Federal Reserve. This is where these numbers come from. This is net worth. And we're going to look at a few different studies, but I think the picture is going to be clear when we look at all these studies together. By the way, there's a lot that we could go into, but for sake of time, I've just highlighted a couple. So the Federal Reserve put together median net worth by age. They also have average net worth by age, but I don't like to use that because when you go with the average, the really high numbers, the really wealthy people bring that average up to where it doesn't really reflect where the middle of the road American is. So I like using median. That actually takes the very middle person from all the way from the extreme of the wealthiest person in America to the poorest. You go smack dab in the middle. Where is that person? So the median net worth by age, remember, net worth is your assets, like your bank account, 401k, house, etc., minus your liabilities, things like your mortgage, student loans, credit cards. So when you subtract all those things out, median net worth for those 18 to 24 is $8,000. I'm just going to breeze right through these, so pay attention for where your age group is. 18 to 24, it's $8,000. 25 to 29, it's $7,500, a little bit of a dip down. 30 to 34, it's $35,000. 35 to 39, $55,000. 40 to 44, $127,000, so a big jump there in the 40s. 45 to 49, $164,000. 50 to 54, $171,000. 55 to 59, $193,000. 60 to 64, $228,000. 65 to 69, $271,000. So that's usually where people kind of typically peak right before retirement. They've built up the most assets and paid down their liabilities over their lifetime. From 70 to 74, it goes down to 258. Actually bumps up from 75 to 79 back up to 273. And then from 80 on, median, I should say, net worth is $235,000. So that's where the middle of the road American is with net worth. Problem with that is that net worth doesn't really tell us the whole story because that doesn't tell you how much they actually have saved for retirement. That just is all of their stuff combined. And remember, the biggest asset for a lot of Americans is their house. Let me just quickly say this about your house. Your house is very likely to appreciate over time, but it's not a good investment. Don't view your house, your primary home, as an investment. It's your home. And it's not really an investment because your house will, yes, appreciate in value, but it's also a continual expense. It's not putting your money in your pocket each month. In fact, you got to spend to maintain it. Even if you pay off your mortgage, still have to pay your property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities. And the only way you're actually going to capitalize off the gain in your house, if you bought it for $200,000, now it's worth $400,000, the only way you're going to see that money is either you got to sell it, which, not many people are going to want to do, or you're going to have to borrow against it, either by taking out another mortgage or a home equity line of credit or doing a reverse mortgage. So, those are not ideal ways to access money. So it's not an investment, all right? And so in order for us to get a better picture of where people are actually at with their savings, let's look at some studies that look at the average retirement savings balance by age. First one I want us to look at is one from Transamerica, Center for Retirement Studies. And they break it down just by decade. So here's the median, again, middle of the road, retirement savings by age in the U.S. For Americans in their 20s, it's $16,000. For Americans in their 30s, $45,000. This would be 401ks, IRAs, just all your retirement savings lumped together. Americans in their 40s, it jumps up to $63,000. Americans in their 50s, $117,000. And then Americans in their 60s, $172,000. Now, Fidelity. Fidelity is the largest 401k provider in the U.S. Here's some numbers from them. Again, just another picture here. They're not factoring in IRAs and taxable accounts and these types of things. They're just looking at 401ks, which, by the way, is the most popular main way that people invest for retirement. So it still gives a good gauge. By the way, these are average numbers, not median numbers, but still, I think worthwhile looking at. So here's Fidelity's numbers. 20-somethings, 20 to 29. Average 401k balance, $10,500. In the 30s, average 401k balance, $38,400. Then in the 40s, it moves up to $93,400. In people in their 50s, $160,000 is the average. 60s, $182,100 is the average. And then 70s, it comes down a little bit to $171,400. Makes sense because a lot of times people are starting to withdraw from their 401ks in retirement. By the way, another interesting thing that they show is that the contribution rate, the percentage of people's income that they're contributing to their retirement accounts, goes up over time. Usually people start with lower percentages and then build it up over time. Average contribution rate in their 20s is 7%, and that goes all the way up to 12% consistently up until the 70s. So the research seems to indicate that the middle of the road American, the average American, if you will, is heading into retirement age around 65 to 67 with about $170,000 to $180,000 in retirement savings. Meanwhile, their net worth is higher than that, but that makes sense because you add in bank accounts, home equity, other miscellaneous assets. So the real question here is that enough? Could you retire successfully with just shy of $200,000? I mean, that's a lot of money, but keep in mind, most people now are living well into their 80s and often into their 90s. Is that enough money for 20 plus years? So how much money does it take to retire successfully? Well, Fidelity also indicates, Fidelity Research says that a good rule of thumb for how much money you should have by the time you turn 67 is 10 times a year's worth of your income. 10 times a year's worth of your income. So for instance, if you make $60,000 a year, Fidelity Research says a good rule of thumb is that you should have $600,000 saved for retirement by the time you turn 67. If you make $250,000 a year, then that number is $2.5 million. And they also break it down kind of by decade, so that when you're younger, where you should be is not as, it allows you to ramp up. Let's put it that way. So by age 30, Fidelity recommends that you would have the equivalent of your annual salary saved up for retirement. So if you make $55,000 a year, by the time you turn 30, you should have $55,000 saved. By the time you turn 40, it should be 3 times your income. By the time you turn 50, it should be 6 times your income. By the time you turn 60, it should be 8 times your income. And then by the time you turn 67, you have 10 times your income saved up. Now, here's the thing. Maybe if you want to pause it right there and do some quick back of the napkin math and see where you're at on that. If you find that you are, quote unquote, behind the average or the recommended savings for your age group, then don't lose heart. Because a rule of thumb is just that. It's a rule of thumb. It doesn't apply to everybody in every scenario. And that's the thing about financial planning that I find time and again. It's really hard to give hard and fast rules that apply across the board. Very often the answer I give to people is it depends. And it's a little bit of a frustrating answer, I guess, because people want, like, just tell me what it is. And a lot of times it just depends. You have to look at what your standard of living is going to be. You have to look at where you live. You have to look at your expenses. You have to look at all of these factors come together. So just because you might be, quote unquote, behind on your age group and what it's recommending doesn't necessarily mean that you're behind. Also, it's not time to lose heart and be like, just throw your hands up in the air. It'll never happen for me. Oh, well, I guess I shouldn't even try. Remember, one of my favorite quotes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. So it's just a reminder for us to do what we can now and plan and save the best we can with however much time we do have, whether you're 20 or whether you're 60. Now, how should you be saving? First of all, if you have a 401k or an employer retirement plan, it's the best place to start, especially if you are offered a match because it's immediately going to double your money. Most 401ks and similar 403bs, TSP, these types of plans, there's a limit of $19,500 a year. If you're 50 or older, that goes up to $26,000. So a lot of room to save inside of those accounts right there. Some plans offer Roth contributions. So instead of taking the tax break now, you take the tax-free income later. You can go back to episode 35 to go over Roth versus traditional IRA contributions and see what the difference is there and which one makes most sense for you. Now, if you don't have a 401k or if you've maxed out the 401k, next level is to look at using an IRA or a Roth IRA. As long as you have earned income and you're not over the income limits for these types of accounts, you can contribute $6,000 a year, or if you're 50 and older, $7,000 a year. So these are great options, and that would be the second place to look. Now, beyond that, if those are not available to you or you're not qualified to use those, you can still invest. All right, you're still able to open a regular investment account. It would be a taxable account, and so you want to make sure that you understand different tax ramifications. But here's the thing. If you're going to be a long-term investor, it's still a good idea, and it's still going to be valuable even if you do it via a taxable account. Yes, the taxes will eat into the returns somewhat, but it's still a good idea when you have a long-term time frame to invest. Ideally, you want to be looking at saving between 10 to 20% of your take-home pay. You say, Nate, I'm not even close to that. I'm like 3%, 5%. That's okay. Start increasing it slightly over time. Better, of course, to be towards that 20%, but 10 to 20% is usually a good range. Probably not going to be able to do that at first. Probably not just going to be overnight, be able to snap your fingers and jump from 5% to 20%. But as your income increases, which it's likely to do over time, fight the temptation to raise your expenses to match your income. Fight that lifestyle creep. Instead, gradually increase your automatic monthly retirement savings. Bump that 401k contribution from 3% to 4%, from 4% to 5%. That automatic $100 going into the Roth IRA every month, bump it from $100 to $125 and then to $150. That's really going to make the difference over time instead of trying to make a huge leap when you just don't have the capacity. So to give you a gauge on what savings can do for you over time, let's use Fidelity's rule of thumb just as an example. All right, again, does that apply to everybody? No. Should that be the set in stone law that you go by for how much you need to save for retirement? No, but I think that gives you at least an idea, a range of sorts. But let's use that as rule of thumb. Let's say you make $100,000 a year, so you want to save $1 million by the time you're 67. Well, how much do you need to save a month to get there? Let's assume that you have zero right now, which is probably not the case, but let's say that you have zero. How much do you need to save a month to get to $1 million? And let's assume that you get an 8% average annual return, which historically for a long term is within the normal range of returns that we've seen in the market, okay, for a well-diversified portfolio. If you're 25 years old, that means you would be able to get to $1 million with $250 a month saved. 8% average annual return gives you over $1 million. If you're 30 years old, you need to bump that up to $370 a month. For a 40-year-old, that's $865 a month. For a 50-year-old, that's $2,300 a month. So you see how the longer you wait, the closer to retirement, the more you really have to ramp up those savings because you don't have as much time for compound interest to do its work. Retirement savings is really important. Okay, so yes, maximize your savings for retirement. Use those accounts to your advantage. But more importantly, also be thinking about your income streams in retirement. Don't neglect to think about other ways that you can build another stream of income besides just Social Security and retirement savings. If you are unsure about whether or not you are on track for retirement, then I would encourage you to talk to a financial planner. In fact, that's probably the main question that I get when people reach out to me. They say, Nate, I'm just trying to figure out if I'm on track and I want to stay on track to get to retirement. Of course, you can reach out to me. I'll be happy to have that conversation, and I'll answer any questions that you have. Here's the thing. There's no obligation to work with me, so if you call me up, you're not going to be on the clock and getting a bill in the mail. Instead, I'll be very clear about how I work with clients, and you'll know all about that before we ever get to the next step. But I'll say this. I know I'm not the right fit for everyone's situation. There's lots of great planners out there that work with different people at different stages of life. I promise that I will do my best to answer questions, and if I'm not the right fit for you, connect you with the right person or give you the right resources for your needs. So if you want to have that conversation, you can email me info@nateskelly.com, or you can just schedule a call at a time that works for you on my website, nateskelly.com. You'll see the tab there, schedule a call. But ultimately, this question of how much do you need to have saved for retirement? Well, yes, it does depend. But it's not as complicated as maybe you think it is. So make sure you do the homework. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of a guideline. Hopefully it gives you a little bit of a boost, of encouragement to say, okay, I can do this. Let me look at this. If it's been something you've been putting off, I hope that you'll put that on the to-do list and get that tackled soon. But as always, thank you for listening, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode.